like to change browser?
Well, I'll keep it on this. It seems to work. I'll unmute myself again.
Sorry, Councillor. The Councillor Birchall is just trying to get in, so she's happy for us to start. She's going to dial in, and the clerk is ready to set live. So whenever you're ready, we'll click live.
Fabulous. Thank you very much indeed. Is everybody okay to start? Thumbs up. Lovely. And you can all hear me, can you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is a weird one. Obviously, it's a weird one. It's so weird that I've actually got a script that I'm going to be working to a certain extent. I mean, I've no doubt that I'll go off script from time to time, but that's just me. So here goes with the script anyway. Hello, I'm Councillor Nick Draper, Chair of the NESC Board. Welcome to the first ever virtual meeting of the North East Surrey Crematorium Board on the 8th of September 2020. If you want to do a whoop at that stage, feel free to do so. You can't hear me. I can't hear you. The Vice Chair is normally Vincent Gallan, but I don't think he's here. Annie, should things go wrong and we lose contact with me, would you be able to go okay to take over? Thumbs up if you are. Fantastic, thank you very much. We're using technology that we have available to ensure that we can continue our work as councillors. We hope everything runs smoothly. Please be patient if we hit some challenges. You know this stuff. You're all going to be patient. It is being live streamed to YouTube, so I'm going to mention a few key points here that will help us to have a successful meeting. First, I'd like to remind members that exempt items, and we have got an exempt item, will be taken at the end of the meeting after all the open items have been completed. The exempt item 13 is review of Chief Officer honoraria and support costs. And at that point, the Chair will move a motion to exclude members of the press and public from the meeting under the 1972 Local Government Act. That's towards the end of the meeting, obviously. So here's the rules, such as they are. When you're not speaking, please turn your microphone off, as this saves bandwidth. It also means that if you're making noises in the background, they don't get heard. You'll appear on screen when your microphone picks up a sound. So this will save the stream cutting to different members suddenly. I'm going to allow plenty of time for members to speak on items, and I'll make this very clear as we move through the agenda. So please only speak when I call on you to do so. When you speak, please turn your camera on when you're happy to do so. I mean, that's I like it, I like being able to see who's talking. When you speak for the first time, please state your name clearly before you begin. Councillors should introduce themselves with their title and name, just like what I just did. Officers should state their name and their title. You don't need to do this every time you speak, please don't, but it will help if you do it the first time. If you want to raise a point during the meeting, please use the chat box found at the top right of your screen. Can you see it? Everybody, thumbs up so you can see the chat box. You know where the chat box is? Okay. We're agreeable on that? Fantastic. Thank you. Where you can type question, debate, or point of order during the meeting. For example, when we come to the debate section of an item, I'll ask those who wish to contribute to simply type debate, and we'll then invite those members to speak one by one. I'll monitor the chat box as the meeting progresses. If you wish to make a point of order or a personal explanation, please do so in the same way, and I'll try to move to you once the person currently speaking has finished. So finally, on some votes, I may ask members to comment their vote in the chat box to save going through a roll call. And I'll make that clear when we come to those votes. So as we begin the meeting, I'll ask the clerk, Sharon, to confirm which members are present and if we have any apologies for absence. As is being done, can I ask members to please comment in the chat box if they wish to declare an interest, which we can come to in a moment. So Sharon, your chance to shine. Would you please confirm who's present?
Thank you, Councillor. People that are currently in the virtual meeting room are Councillor Nigel Bembo, Councillor Jean Crosby, Councillor Terry Walsh, Councillor Graham Henderson, Councillor Paula Walker and Councillor Annie Morale. I can see 2 people on the phone. If there's Councillor Ryder or Councillor Birchall on the phone, or Councillor Henry, could you let us know if you're in the meeting, please?
I am here, Mike Ryder.
Thank you, Councillor Ryder. Yeah, we can. Has Councillor Rosemary Birchall managed to come into the meeting yet? I can't hear her, but I know she is trying to get in, so we'll progress with the meeting and let her in as she arrives. And I've had apologies for absence from Councillor Gallagher, and we also know Councillor Henry is trying to get into the meeting, so I don't think Councillor Henry's in the meeting yet.
Oh, I know she was trying.
The clerk support is trying to get hold of both of those people to help them get into the meeting room. Thank you, Chair.
I've just discovered something, by the way. It's never too late to learn. According to the meeting details, I'm Anthony Draper. I'm not Anthony Draper. That is my son. He set up my account. Forgive me. Right. So I've just checked to see if anyone's declared any interests. Sharon, have you heard anything about declaring interests?
No, I can't see anything in the chat to indicate anyone has any declarations of interest, Chair.
Me neither. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass to the minutes of the last meeting. So the last meeting, which I'm sure you all remember, was held on the 10th of March 2020. And I'll allow you time to speak if you want to express dissent or anything else on the minutes. But if you're happy to accept those minutes, please either put your thumbs up, or those people who, oh gosh, it's going to be difficult for the people who are on the phone, isn't it? Please indicate this or comment in the chat box. Are you all happy to pass these minutes as accurate?
I am Mike Ryder.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. It sounds like those minutes are approved, and I'll sign those minutes outside of the virtual meeting after social distancing restrictions are lifted. There you go. Right. Now, this is the important bit, I think. We'll now move to consider item 4, the COVID response, the report of the chief officers. Now, this is in your packs from pages 7 to 54. I have to say that your officers, both the ones reporting and Barbara and her team, and everybody at the Crem has done an extraordinary job during the pandemic. So before I start, I would like to formally say how incredibly grateful I am to them for doing so. So right. Mark and Clive are going to present this. Who's going first? Mark, Clive?
It's me first. Clive Andrews, surveyor to the board. Good morning, board members. we have a joint report, as you say, from the Treasurer, the Clerk, and myself as the Surveyor. We're going to present the report in sequential order. Therefore, I'm going to start as a Surveyor, and I'm going to advise you on just really to summarise the report, and then I'm happy to take questions at the end of my part, and then I'll hand over to the Clerk, who will also take questions after Sharon has finished, and then we'll move over to the Treasurer and he'll do the same. So, as I've said, this was a joint report for decisions taken by the Chairman under the Board's scheme of delegation during the COVID-19 lockdown period. There wasn't any face-to-face contact between officers and board members. However, there was regular contact via telephone and email between the relevant officers and the Chairman, and of course Barbara at the crematorium. If I could draw your attention to page 8 of this report, and this is paragraph 3.5, which is the charges for the services. Now, as I said, I'm just going to summarise the decisions that were made by the Chairman in the absence of board members. And I want to take you to, as I say, paragraph 3.5, which is where the crematorium can offer a recording of the service for those that can't attend the service. Now, that became very poignant during lockdown because, as you well know, there was some degree of heartache from people who weren't able to say goodbye personally to a loved one because we were restricted to a number of people at the crematorium, and we couldn't cater for huge numbers of people for those reasons of COVID. Because there was such a demand from people for the internet service, the system simply crashed. It couldn't cope. So we had a situation where we were offering a service which we just couldn't deliver. And so if I take you down to 3.8, and the first decision which the Chairman made, and this was for the crematorium to absorb the cost of providing the internet link to the public whilst the website was unavailable for a 2-week period. And that was, and you can see the dates, 24th of March to the 3rd of April. Secondly, thereafter, the crematorium, once the website was up and running again, we believe because many people couldn't attend the service, as a gesture of goodwill, we took the cost of that recording of the service and the website at cost price, and we absorbed that for whilst the restrictions are in place, and we've carried on with that thereafter. Are there any questions on charges for services before I continue? Thank you. And then we move on to operational hours. Now, because of the huge demand from funeral directors, we had to extend the hours of opening of the crematorium, and we had a 2-shift system. We had to bring staff in from other areas of Enable in order for us to operate a system from 7 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, from Monday through to Friday, to cope with the demand for cremations. Now, there were 2 decisions made by the Chairman, and if I refer you to page 9, paragraph 3.12, we were carrying out over 20 cremations a day at one point, and 6 of those cremations were what we call direct cremations. Now, direct cremations are usually carried out before 9 a.m. in the morning, and we usually take up to 2 cremations per day. Because of the huge demand for direct cremations, and these direct cremations are where there are usually no mourners, and it's really for the funeral director to bring the coffin to the crematorium, and then the coffin is left at the crematorium for the process to take place. So we were taking, in addition, 4 direct cremations a day, and there is a reduced fee of £275 for a direct cremation, and we made the decision that a direct cremation fee be extended to up to 6 cremations per day, and that was a decision that was made by the chairman at the time on behalf of the board. And then there is a surcharge fee of £52 for cremations taken after 20 to 5 in the evening, and that's in addition to the standard cremation fee of £605. Under the circumstances, because we had such a huge influx of cremations, we advised the chairman that we ought to waive that £52 cremation fee. So both of those decisions are still in place because we're still restricting numbers of people attending a service, and indeed we expect a possible upsurge in demand for cremations as we move into the winter months. So we're leaving that process in place. Now, I wondered if there was any questions that board members had on operational hours.
Clive, I believe Councillor Henderson has a question.
Yes, Councillor.
Mr. Andrews, thank you very much indeed. Very pleased to hear you extend the hours and the numbers of direct cremations to a maximum of 6 per day. Can I ask whether that 6 per day was exceeded or not? To what extent was that taken up? Were there any applications for direct cremations which could not be met within that limit of 6 per day?
I'm going to ask Barbara if she could come in there and answer that question directly. Barbara?
Funeral directors were happy to just book the earliest possible slots we had for direct cremation. So we were able to do them within sort of a week of them phoning to book them. We never exceeded the 6 because obviously we had to make sure we could manage our capacities through the cremators at all times.
Fine, but overall, you managed to manage the total number of applications for direct cremations over a reasonable period of time.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was always, within a week, there was always direct cremations free. We some days did the full capacity of 23 cremations, which is 17 attended and 6 direct. But I would say probably 1 or 2 days a week, there were only 4 or 5 direct. So there was always availability.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on those two points?
There don't appear to be, Clive.
Okay, thank you. So we're on page 9 of the report. I'm now going to hand over to the clerk, and she can run through the decisions were taken in respect of the clerk.
Thank you, Clive. So I'm referring to paragraph 3.14 on page 9 of the report. As you know, we usually have the annual meeting in June, and due to the COVID-19 situation, we were unable to continue with that face-to-face meeting. And we therefore sought permission from the chair to cancel the meeting. The chair agreed to this, and all of the members were advised accordingly. Also at the June meeting, we would usually appoint a new chair and vice chair because these are rotated on an annual basis. And as we were unable to do that in June, that's on today's agenda. And the final thing that we were due to do in June was the review of the member representation. And again, that item is now on today's agenda as we were unable to cover it in the June meeting. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. There's no questions. I'm going to hand on to the Treasurer, to Mark Davis.
Before you do that, I've got your name down as Haggis Labour, but I don't believe that's really your name. I think that's a pseudonym. Yeah, you had a question that you wanted to ask.
Thank you very much. Actually, it was more a comment. And just to emphasise, so my name is Paula Walker. I'm Councillor Walker. I am from Wandsworth Labour. But just to really say thank you again for all the flexibility you've shown in making the IT happen, and also to absorb the costs so that people who are really worried about finance, we've had a number of cases here, you know, as I'm sure everyone has come across over the last few months, about how to afford during the COVID crisis. So I just wanted to really say thank you from us for your flexibility.
I think that's noted.
I actually had a question, if I may ask, but I don't think you heard me, Chair, because of a slight problem with interference on this.
Sorry, hang on a second. I have a bit of interference. Sorry, who's speaking?
It's Terry Walsh, Councillor
Terry. Sorry,
I've
lost your picture. That's all.
Yeah, there was a bit of a blip, but I can see myself now, so hopefully you can see me. I just wanted to go back one, if I may. I wouldn't detract from all that's been said. The only thing is, can you tell us, please, a little bit as to whether any cremations were actually refused, and also particularly, can you explain the scope of the area that we took cremations for? In other words, presumably there were people asking applying from outside the area, perhaps not knowing the restrictions or the rules for cremations in the crematorium. What was the situation there? I mean, did you have people perhaps wanted to have the cremation held there with, you know, who lived miles and miles away? I mean, did you have a priority system or what? Or were all cremations applications actually dealt with?
Can I ask you, Barbara, to comment there, and I can come in if need be?
We don't actually have any sort of restrictions on who can come to the crematorium. We never have had. And we've accepted all cremations regardless of where they live, where they come from. If people are booking and we have space, they're allowed the spaces.
So what would be the situation if in fact you had more demand than there was supply? Would you give priority then to local cremations, or what? Local people, or what?
Not really, no. I mean, obviously we increased our capacities in 2 stages, and we were cremating eventually from 6 in the morning till 10 at night. But all crematoria were in the same position where there just wasn't any bookings for at least 2-3 weeks ahead. So it was literally just on a first come, first served basis. It's very difficult to try and work with only people that are local can come in, because obviously it's all about it's not necessarily where the deceased lived, it's sometimes where the family live and they want the deceased to come to this crematorium because they've got other people interred here or whatever. So it's quite difficult to sort of impose a restriction on who can and who can't come here.
So nobody was turned away, in other words?
Nobody was turned away. Bookings were probably about 3 to 4 weeks ahead because of the numbers, but nobody was turned away.
Was there any, I suppose you wouldn't know the answer to this, but was there any difficulties with storage of deceased in mortuaries or whatever? I mean, was that sort of something that was, shall we say, unfortunately, that could be all dealt with?
Because they put a lot of temporary mortuaries in place. I mean, our local hospital, St Helier, reached their maximum capacity, and they started sending deceased to a storage facility in North London, which made it awkward for the funeral directors, and they had to go to North London to pick up the deceased. But that's the only one I've really heard of.
Did we have access to the storage facility at Putney Vale, which was built? I think that could take quite a few, couldn't it? Was that ever used by, to your knowledge, or what?
sorry, Clive, it never was actually put into use. And I think that the idea of that hub was not for hospital people, it was for people in the community to ease the storage problems with funeral directors if they had any, but they never actually physically used Putney Vale's hub.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I can just add to that, Councillor, we do have a storage facility up to 6 coffins at North East Surrey. So therefore, with an influx of up to 23 cremations per day, that was used because there's a finite amount of time that the 2 cremators that we have can take for the cremation process. So therefore, there was always coffins that would have been in our storage facility, but all of the cremations took place that day.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to carry on, Clive?
Yes, I believe it's the Treasurer now who's going to carry on with the third part of the report, the joint report.
Good morning, councillors. I'm Mark Davies. I'm the Treasurer to the board. So we're on to section 3.20 on report 4. So under normal reporting cycle, I would bring a report to the June meeting and seek approval for the financial statements. And the authorities to submit what's known as the Annual Governance and Accountability Return, which is also known as the AGAR. As a result of the cancellation of the June meeting, I sought approval on the 22nd of June from the chairman to submit the required documents. I circulated an email with all the normal June reports as an attachment, and these are provided as an appendices to this report. I didn't receive any comments on that, and I had a brief discussion with the chairman, and happy to say that the final documents were submitted on the 11th of July, which was well in advance of the revised deadline of the 31st of July. I'm happy to take any questions on the quite lengthy appendices that I've attached, but I wasn't planning to take you through them in any detail.
I have nothing come through on the chat. Has anybody got any questions? I think you're all right.
Thank you. If I just move on to the financial matters then, just to give you a summary of what the decisions that we've taken have actually cost in terms of operating expenditure. We've estimated that overall the decision to extend the opening hours and to waive the costs, which is covered in 4.1 of this report, has cost an additional 50,000 in terms of operating expenses. I think you need to bear in mind there, though, that there's been it's difficult to tell, but it appears to be an additional 450 cremations done within that sort of 3-month period at the height of the pandemic. And if you assume that they were roughly the standard cremation fee, that's an additional £210,000 worth of income that the board's generated. So in simple terms, an additional £50,000 worth of costs, an additional £210,000 worth of income. So sort of a net additional income of 160,000 over the period. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Any questions for Mark on that particular point? I will come back on that later on, but no questions on that.
Okay.
Who's next? Is it still yourself, Mark, or is it back to Clive?
I think we're sort of at the end of this particular report, so it's probably getting Sharon to move on to the recommendations. Or
whoa,
that's right. So if you're happy for me to read the recommendation, Chair, or if you would like to read it.
I'm more than happy for you to do it, quite honestly, because you have to tell me which page they're on.
On page 7, so the recommendation.
Okay, page 7, yeah. Sorry, folks. I tell you what, this is my moment in the spotlight. I'll do this. Okay. Basically the North East Surrey Crematorium Board is to recommend it to note the decisions taken by the chairman, the chair, on behalf of the board as set out below. Okay, in other words, as set out in the report. Now, I'd like you to give us a thumbs up. I think a thumbs up should be sufficient for this, but if people would prefer to either put it through on the chat or to say or to go to a roll call, I'm quite happy to go either. But generally, by thumbs up, are people happy with this report? Okay, I see no dissent. Okay, which gives us a chance to move on to the next bit of the meeting, which is, sorry about this, folks, the appointment of chair and vice chair. But before we do that, I would like to, I said at the beginning how incredibly impressed I was with Clive and Mark and with Barbara and her team. I think the report has, in a way, hidden some of the really complex and very difficult decisions that the officers had to make. For instance, at one point, we were using people from Wandsworth's library service to help keep the operations going, and I think the particularly towards the beginning, Barbara would confirm this or otherwise, there was an awful lot of sheer panic from the population at large. Terry kind of referred to it in a way with what he was saying just now, and the fact that Barbara and her team dealt with that on a day-to-day basis just shows that what a very strong and very dedicated team that we have. Mark has also made it clear that we have, although we made sure that we were giving people value for money, and we certainly didn't try to profit from the very difficult circumstances, but despite that we have made a surplus, and it would be, I don't know whether this is the right time to talk to this, Clive, but we did actually talk about what we could do with some of that surplus at a later stage. Is there any comment you'd like to make on that? Clive, your mic's off.
Is that better? Can everyone hear me?
Much better.
My only comment there is I believe it's for the councils themselves to make a decision on where funds should be distributed if North East Surrey are of the mind to distribute extra surplus. I don't know whether the Treasurer wants to comment on that.
Thank you, Clive. Yeah, so we would normally bring a report to the December meeting to deal with the distribution of any surplus. I mean, under a normal operating year, we've usually got about £500,000 surplus that gets distributed back to the three constituent councils. I mean, a broad estimate would suggest there be an additional 150, maybe 200,000, but I won't know for sure until I've gone through the budget setting exercise in December. I mean, there's obviously decisions can be taken about whether we want to do any further investment on the crematorium facilities, or if we want to be putting a little bit extra aside for the cremator replacement. As you'll be aware, we've spoken about this before, about building up a reserve. So at the point in time that the cremators need replacing in approximately 10-15 years, we'll have sufficient available to essentially pay for it in over the long run, rather than having to incur any borrowing at the point in time that they need to be replaced.
Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. And I would say that you know, things were said during lockdown and since about crematoria really profiting out of things. we made a point of keeping our costs to mourners down, and I think we did well out of that as a result of it. But it's something that you may find coming into your inboxes during the coming months, and it's very, very useful to know what Clive and what Mark have said about how we're going to distribute any excesses that we do have. I have a question from Paula again. Paula?
Thank you very much. Would the just in terms of the extra funding, and I wonder, would the board consider having a fund, especially as we're waiting for whatever will happen in winter with COVID, to support people who aren't able to afford costs? I appreciate cremation is cheaper than burial. I mean, clearly, if that's not used, then it could go into one of the capital projects that has already been mentioned. But it might be worth pausing and having that fund ready to support people who can't manage it. I do know of a case where that happened, so that's why I've brought it up.
May I come in here and comment?
Please do, Clive.
There is council. There is a mechanism in place, which is the funeral fund, which it's a government example of helping people with the funds. There is, I might say, perhaps a flaw in that, because when somebody applies for the funeral fund, they don't know whether or not they're actually going to be successful with the funeral fund until after they've made the arrangements for the funeral. So really, they're making these arrangements not knowing whether or not it's going to be supported through the state. That said, I've been surveyor for some years now, and I know that the board are very mindful of costs of funerals, and that's why we're one of the less expensive crematoriums in the UK. If you look at funeral costs, I would say that 75% of those costs are the funeral director's costs, and the remainder are the crematoriums and the disbursements, which are doctors' fees and clergy fees. So we've always been very, very mindful and sympathetic to costs of cremations for people who can sometimes ill afford it in certain points of their life.
Thank you very much, Clive. Well, one thing that I would say, in addition to what Clive has just said there, I know that the North East Surrey Crematorium remained full with a relatively long waiting list after a lot of its surrounding crematoria they started losing those backlogs, and one of the reasons for that was that we are less expensive to the bereaved, and I think that's something that we should wear as a badge of pride, quite honestly. There's one other thing, that because the burners were working virtually constantly, I believe they were incredibly efficient at the time. I don't know, Clive, have you got anything on that? They were efficient anyway, but they became incredibly efficient, and that was another thing towards keeping our costs down.
Well, as I've said in previous meetings, cremators become more efficient the more they're used, and as we were taking up to 23 cremations a day, there wasn't this continual cooling down and heating up process, which of course uses the most gas for getting to achieving the temperature. So there was very little time for them to cool down before they were in operation once again. So when I get to my part of my surveyor's report as to the overview of the operations for the last quarter, I will comment on the efficiency of those cremators.
Thank you, Clive. Now I have two questions. The first one is from Councillor Crosby, Councillor Jean Crosby. It actually was a written question. I don't know if you want to.
No, that's fine. I couldn't find my microphone. I was wondering, could a plaque be put up in the crematorium dedicated to the victims of this terrible virus, dated for this year? You know, it's been a disastrous year, and as that money has come from unfortunate circumstances, it wouldn't be a bad idea if we could put some sort of memorial in place. Perhaps it's not going to cost very much, is it, to have something in place dedicated to the victims that have actually died through the virus. I wondered whether that was a way that we could use some of the surplus. Yeah, it's just an idea.
Anyone have any comment they'd like to make on that, Clive, Mark?
Well, I'll perhaps invite councillors to give a view on that before I said anything. It's perhaps a board decision.
I think that's very fair. I mean, my feeling is that actually, I've heard worse ideas. Quite honestly, I think it's a very good idea, but I'd like to see it costed, because something, you know, just so that we know what we're actually dealing with. And obviously what you actually say on the plaque, Jean, that's where it starts getting a bit complicated. But as an idea, I personally think, but here I'm just speaking as one of a panel, I think it's a really good idea. Anybody else want to comment? Annie thinks it's a good idea as well.
Could I just add that we are still in the midst of COVID. We don't know what's ahead for us. So in terms of timing, if we were to put together a memorial plaque, perhaps we ought to leave it until the early part of next year, and after we've seen the impact of perhaps a second wave. We don't perhaps want to act too prematurely on this, and see where we are perhaps in the spring of next year.
I think that's a very, very wise comment. Thank you very much indeed, Clive. I now have Graham who'd like to make a comment. Graham Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Graham Henderson, Wandsworth. Can I come back to Councillor Walker's proposal, because I think there is a considerable amount of merit in that. Can I say, having been on the board for the past 2 years, I certainly appreciate what officers and the board have actually done to keep fees as low as possible. And I certainly congratulate officers and yourself, Chair, in waiving certain fees. So I do recognise the crematorium as a whole has tried to keep fees down as low as possible. But clearly, within such a crisis, there are a number of people who suddenly find themselves with bills they cannot possibly meet. And it may well be a minority of cases, but I do think that given we do have a surplus, that we should certainly look favourably upon those people who say they do have genuine difficulties in meeting the fees, particularly given Mr. Andrews' quite accurate description of the government scheme. And clearly, because we are still in semi-lockdown, we're having virtual meetings, perhaps what I would suggest, because clearly this needs to be costed. We can't embark upon something which is just a completely open pit. But could I ask possibly the officers, in conjunction with the chair and vice chair, look at this, but if anything crops up between now and the next meeting, to certainly give serious consideration to helping out any people who find themselves in that difficulty, and certainly to delegate authority to officers, clearly reporting back to the board by email or by report. But I do think there is a considerable amount of merit in what Councillor Walker says. We are in most unusual times, and I really do think for those people who are really struggling and suddenly find themselves with the trauma of a death in the family and having to pay for that, we should certainly try and do as much as we possibly can. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment, please?
Of course.
Sorry, I don't know if there's a mechanism by which one can put one's hand up, but it's not actually on my screen for some reason. Can you all hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Just to say, I'm in sympathy with the idea. Really, this is crematorium costs are costs against the estate, and sometimes it won't be known immediately whether the estate can pay or not. So it may be that the best judgment is when one knows how large the estate was. So if someone had a lot of money, for example, obviously they wouldn't qualify, but obviously I can appreciate there could be situations where relatives and friends didn't have the money at the time to pay. But I think we just need to be careful that we don't actually unwittingly have a situation where people actually claim and there is no basis on it when the estate is looked at. I think that's more or less what government departments do anyway. And I think in audit purposes, that's probably the best approach.
I think this is going to be, it's certainly a very valid debate, but it actually is a debate, colleagues. And I think it may well be, first of all, we'd have to know what was being proposed. And we'd have to know, sorry, Mark, how much it was going to cost. You know, what sort of quantities of money we'd be laying aside. You know, how many people we could help. It is certainly. I came across it during lockdown. Somebody who worked for the NHS had absolutely no money, had no idea how it was to be paid for. So we've all been there. We know what this is about. And I have absolute sympathy with the idea, but I don't think we can make a decision on it today. It will be down to the next chair to decide when we make the decision. But when we do, I'd like it to be, personally, from my point of view, I'd like it to be an agenda item, you know, fully reported on. Does that have a general assent? I think so. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much indeed. Right, I'm now going to go to the item 5, the bit that I should have been doing back in May or June or whatever, the appointment of the new chair and of the vice chair. Now, by convention, I'm reading this again, the role of chair of the board is taken by the 3 constituent authorities in rotation. To accord with that convention, the chair for 2020-21 should be elected from among the London Borough Sutton councillors. I'll read through the lot of this, okay? And by convention, the role of vice chair is taken again in rotation. And to accord with that convention, the chair for 2021 should be elected from the London Borough of Wandsworth councillors. So us in Merton, we're off the hook. First of all, I'm going to get nominations while I'm still in the chair for chair of the board. Councillor Crosby.
Could I nominate, please, Councillor Annie Morrell?
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that? If you haven't, I just did. Okay, I seconded you. Are there any other nominations? There don't appear to be. Annie, could you unmute yourself and say whether or not you want to be? You want it?
Yeah, I accept the position, Chair.
Fantastic, congratulations. And I'm afraid to say that at this point, you take over as chair. Have you got the script, by the way?
I have, Nick. Thank you very much.
Grand. Okay. Over to you, Annie.
And just let me say thank you very much, Nick, for all your superb chairing. So hopefully this is my second meeting at this committee, and I'm hoping to step up to the plate, Nick. But my first speech as chair would be to thank everybody, the officers, and of course all the frontline workers. This couldn't have happened without them, and I'd just like to say thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 6, which is the...
Excuse me, Chair. Sorry, Chair, could we appoint the Vice Chair before you move on, please, from the Wandsworth councillors, if that's okay?
My apologies, Sharon. Do we have any nominations for the Vice Chair from Wandsworth Council?
Chairman, congratulations. It's Terry Walsh here. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
My understanding was that one of my colleagues was actually making a written nomination to the outgoing chair of Rosemary Birchall for Vice Chairman. Was that received? Does anybody know about it? Are either of them here?
If it was received, Terry, it might have been sent to my council address. I'm still having difficulty getting councillor emails through. But assuming that Rosemary's okay on it, we'll take that as a nomination. Is there a seconder for that? Nigel has just seconded. Thank you, Nigel. And have we got any certainty that Rosemary's happy to take the job on? It's a tough old job.
Hi. Hello. I'm on my telephone. Apologies for not being on the computer. And yes, I accept that. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for all their hard work.
Welcome, Rosemary, as my second. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Is that fine with you, Sharon?
That's great. I've noted those nominations and appointments. Thank you very much.
Okay. We'll now move on to consider item 6, a report of the clerk regarding review of number of members from each constituent authority to be appointed to the board. Sharon, could you briefly introduce this report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as part of the North East Surrey Crematorium Board Act, it states from the 1st of June in 1965 and every subsequent 5th year, the constitution of the board shall be revised so that the number of members to be appointed by each constituent authority to hold office during the next following period of 5 years shall be on the basis of 1 member for every 70,000 inhabitants, or part 70,000. Earlier this year, the Office of National Statistics provided an estimation of the population numbers for each constituent authority, and you'll see that data in the table of the report, which is on page 56, and it's table 3.1. These figures indicate that there is no need to amend the number of members appointed from each constituent authority. So unless there's any questions, I'm happy to take any questions or for you to read the recommendations.
Is there any questions? Would you use the chat box or signal to me? Unfortunately, the names, Sharon, have gone off lots of the people, so I don't, because this is only my second meeting, I'm not quite clear on the names of people.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking on the chat. I can't see anyone has indicated in the chat that they've got a question. So unless someone waves at you or verbally says if they're on the phone, if they've got a question, I think you're okay to move to read the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I'll read the recommendations. The recommendations are to consider the latest population details as highlighted in paragraph 3.1, and to note that based on these figures, there is no requirement to amend the number of board members appointed by each constituent authority this year. 2.2, agree that the membership will remain as in whereby constituent authorities are able to appoint up to London Borough of Merton 3 members, London Borough of Sutton 3 members, and London Borough of Wandsworth 5 members. Is that agreed? Is that thank you. Thank you very much. Remember, this is only my second virtual as well, so I'm struggling here, but thank you. That's agreed, Sharon?
That's great. Thank you, Chair.
We'll move on to item 7. Sorry, I've got so much paper on my desk.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
I was just going to introduce you, Clive.
Yes, please. Thank you.
We'll move to consider item 7, report of the surveyor, and Clive will briefly introduce this report.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If I'll refer board members to page 59 of this agenda, and this is my report for the quarter up to September 2020, and it's regarding the day-to-day management of the crematorium, which is carried out by the council, carried out by Wandsworth Council, and is managed by Enable Leisure and Culture. If I could take you to paragraph 3.1, which is business level activity, and also refer you to page 65, which is appendix A of my report, and this is the business level activity. As the Treasurer has already alluded to, we had an exceptionally busy first 4 months of this financial year, and you can see exceptionally high cremation numbers for those 4 months. I'm pleased to say that those numbers have now stabilised, and I can report to the board that we carried out 148 cremations for the month of August, which, if you compare that to August of last year, it's very much the same. So figures have stabilised. Now, in terms of an average number of cremations for the year, that will be revisited in the December report. We always look at the figures to see business level activity for the year to date in the December report, and we'll look at those because at the moment we've got an exceptionally high number for the first 5 months of this financial year. And I think with what may be ahead of us with perhaps a second wave, we'll have a clearer picture of what's going on when we report to you in December. So we're leaving the average number of cremations at 1,950 for the year. But as I say, we will revisit that in the December meeting. Are there any questions on that at this point? Thank you. If I can move forward to 3.5 of the report, which is performance monitoring. I'm only going to summarise some of the more relevant points of the report, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. The inspection of the crematorium was carried out on the 18th of August. If I could take you down to 3.10 under legislation, and there was already comment made about the efficiency of the cremators. These cremators are state of the art, and the information that's received by Merton's environmental health officer, and indeed myself, from the crematorium managers, shows over a 90% efficiency, and that's fairly predictable with the way in which these machines have been used over the previous months. As I said before, the cremators become more efficient, the more they are used. In fact, as a point of interest, if you go across Europe to see how cremators are used over there, there are certain countries whereby the service takes place at a chapel, and they're taken to from there. They're taken to a cremation centre dedicated for cremations, and those cremations are carried out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So therefore, their efficiency would be nearer 100%. If you take that into context, if we're nearing 90% for efficiency of our cremators, then it really shows we bought very wisely when we replaced the cremators some 4 years ago. Moving on to 3.11, the annual emissions test of certain particulates. This is very important because this forms part of our permit to cremate, which is issued by Merton's Environmental Health Office. Because of the circumstances relating to COVID, the engineers couldn't find anywhere to stay over the 3-day period that they usually carry out those tests. And by agreement with Merton's EHO, that's been now put back until next spring. But of course, it was vital that we got the green light from Merton's EHO on that one. I wasn't going to comment any more on the actual performance monitoring, and I'm happy to take any questions at this point from board members.
Are there any questions? What? Can't see anything in the chat box.
Thank you. Then I'll move on to 3.17, which is quality control. In the past 3 months, we received 2 complaints. I addressed both of those complaints. The first one was regarding the arrangements in place by the crematorium. We were challenged over that. In my reply, I gave a comprehensive list, and you'll see this further in my report, of the measures that are in place by the crematorium for the safety of public and staff and funeral directors. And I didn't get any comeback from that report, so I think that was a fairly compelling letter that I gave to the complainant and gave them the reassurance of the measures that are in place by the crematorium. The second complaint was it was a difficult one because it was from a lady who'd lost her husband, and she was unclear as to the disposal methods for the disposal of her husband's ashes in the Garden of Remembrance. Now, of course, these types of complaints are very sensitive. You know, people are going through the bereavement process. So I had to, at the same time, give her a very, very sensitive reply, but also draw her attention to the crematorium's written procedures on the disposal of those ashes, and also the statutory forms, both of which she would have signed at the time. Fortunately, I didn't receive a second letter from the lady, so I was very hopeful that I concluded that matter. But as I say, these aren't easy to answer, at this point, I'll take any questions from the board over those 2 complaints. Thank you. I'll now move on to point 3.21, which is employee matters. There's been a recent restructure within Enable Leisure and Culture, and now Kelvin Taylor has been appointed as Head of Bereavement Services. Now, Mr. Taylor sent me his apologies for the meeting today. However, he will from time to time represent Enable Leisure and Culture at the meetings along with Barbara. And then I move on to the second point of employee matters, and that is Barbara, who is squirreling away with her qualification for the certificate for the ICCM. It's a long haul. I can tell you that through personal experience. When you're working full time and you have to study outside of working hours, that's a tough ask. And that said, Barbara continues, and she's nearly there. She's nearly at the finish line. She's got one more assignment to do for her final module, and we'll all be waiting eagerly to see when she actually qualifies with her certificate. And I'm very much hoping that she'll be successful in the near future. Are there any comments from board members on employee matters?
I'd just like to show my appreciation for Barbara, and just to keep going, and we hope that you get your certificate soon, Barbara, and thank you.
Can I just interrupt? It's Rosemary Birchall. Just well done, Barbara. Keep up the good work, because I know that you are an excellent employee, and congratulations on getting as far as you have, and we look forward to seeing your certificate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to 3.24, customer statistics. All statistics have been produced as required. On to 3.26, health and safety. We had a recent overall summary of health and safety, which was considered as good, and there were remedial recommendations, and they are being actioned by crematorium management. Some of them are basic housekeeping issues, which can be rectified almost immediately. And then there are other longer-term health and safety issues that we need to address. For example, fireproof glass in certain areas of the crematory. These can't happen overnight. Orders have been placed, purchase orders have been placed, and they will be rectified ASAP. And I will report on health and safety and how that's going in the December report. There was also a fire risk assessment carried out, and that was graded as medium to a moderate risk. And again, any actions from that are being rectified through purchase orders. Are there any questions from board members on health and safety? Thank you. Now I'm moving on to 3.28, and that's the action plan. So can I draw you to Appendix B of the report, which is page 67. If everybody's, I'll just give a moment for board members to source Appendix B of 67. Is everybody on page 67?
Yes. Everybody on page 67?
Thank you. Okay. The first action is to take all necessary steps for the crematorium to be compliant with their permit to cremate. Now, as I've already said, the annual emission test has been postponed, and Merton EHO have agreed to that, so that will take place next year. If I move on to item 2, this is the trading agreement that we've got with Cameo, which are the national organisation. If I can give a little bit of background to members who aren't familiar with the Cameo scheme. Back in 2012, the government at the time brought in emissions requirements for all crematoria throughout the country, whereby they had to abate at least 50% of their mercury emissions that were going up through their chimney stacks. At the time, board members grasped the nettle, and they not only abated 50% of their cremations, they actually brought in 100% abatement. And because of that, that meant that we could trade our spare TMACs, as they're called, within the industry, within the UK. So, for example, to give you, if we were carrying out 2,000 cremations a year, we've abated 2,000 cremations. So, therefore, we can trade 1,000 of those cremations with other crematoria that haven't abated fully to the 50%. So we're able to gain income from those spare TMACs. So we trade those through Cameo. So we trade our 1,000 and then they are distributed to those crematoriums that require abated cremations, because this is a national agreement. Overall, 50% of cremations need to be abated in the country, so therefore it's a collective agreement. It does sound a little bit convoluted, but it does work, and we do derive income from it. And I'm told that Cameo will be in contact with us this month to give us what we derived from the scheme for this year. I'm happy to take questions on that one, because I know for people that aren't familiar with the Cameo scheme, I wrote reams of work on this in previous reports. So I'm happy to take any questions on the Cameo scheme if anyone's got them. Okay, thank you. Moving on to page 68, this is the new Ashes Lawn scheme for the Garden of Remembrance. Now, board members that have been with us for some time will know that there's been some deliberation over this. It is a huge scheme. Investigations from myself through the ICCM. It's going to be the first of its like in local authority throughout the country. So yeah, we've got no litmus test with this one. We are the first to do this. I brought along a landscape architect at the March 20 meeting, and unfortunately he's since left the service. So all of his ideas that we were very much reliant upon for him to bring forward, I had to source another landscape architect through design services. And we've got somebody on board. I'm really pleased with what he's doing so far. That said, then of course COVID came along, and that's had an impact on all of what we were going to do. We were hoping to have this concluded by about now, but that wasn't to be. So we've now got a new timeline, and we intend to have the Ashes Lawn raised by June 21. Now, there are two poignant dates in the calendar, well, three actually, because we've got Mother's Day, we've got Easter, and we've got Father's Day, and we certainly don't want to be doing works of that nature when the crematorium is very busy with visitors. So we found a slot between Easter and Father's Day of next year when the works will be carried out, and the works will take between 4 and 6 weeks. Now, I've got to say, this project is difficult. This hasn't been easy, and I've had numerous meetings with Barbara and the council's design services with ideas of how we're going about this raising of the Ashes Lawn. We were going to actually build a retaining wall to hold the amount of soil above the existing lawn, but that was seen to be fraught with problems, and so we abandoned that idea. So now we're actually going to raise the lawn from all 4 sides with a gradual layer of soil, which all of the members at the March meeting seem to go ahead with to approve that one. So we're now in the process of putting a specification together to go out to tender over the autumn-winter period. as I said, so we can start works next year. Now that isn't all of it, because we've also had to have meetings with the arboricultural department regarding the trees in and around the Garden of Remembrance itself, and we know where we are. We know the way forward with the arboricultural works that need to be taking place. I've also commissioned and approved design services to carry out an appropriate drainage plan, because the existing lawn floods terribly in prolonged periods of wet weather. We don't really want to. We've got this opportunity now that when we raise the level of the Ashes lawn, we can put appropriate drainage in place. Therefore, we won't have the problems with flooding, which has caused quite a lot of upset to the bereaved over the years. And on the land, on the footprint of the Ashes lawn, we actually have a World War II civilian war memorial, and I've had to have meetings with the conservation officer as to how we're going to approach raising the level not only of the lawn but raising the level of the memorial itself. And in principle, we've got agreement to how we're going to proceed with this. So we need to bring in specialist builders to actually take apart the memorial and rebuild it again. And it will be also our opportunity to refurbish the war memorial itself using a stonemason. So there's lots going on with the raising of the Ashes lawn. And at this point, I'm happy to take any questions from members as to where we are with this project.
Is there any questions? Could I just ask, Clive? I was at the last meeting, and there was some really nice plans. Were that the plans from the gentleman who's now left us? Yes, they were. So it wasn't easy just to pick up on those plans, because a lot of his ideas were in his own head and he hadn't shared them with anyone else. So we had to surmise what those plans were, and then we had to employ another professional from design services, and then we had to take those, what we believe to be those ideas, forward. So will we be seeing those designs, Clive, at some point? You will. At the moment, we've got technical drawings which I've approved from the various discussions, on-site discussions that we've had, and you will see details of those as we develop those plans. But at the moment, they are technical drawings. But you saw an original image at the last meeting, and we're very much sticking to that particular design that was seen at the time. But as we go through respective meetings, I will update the board members as to where we are. I very much hope in December we'll have some sort of semblance of a specification that we can put out to tender. Right, thank you, Clive. Any more? A question from Graham Henderson. Would you like to read that out, Graham?
Sorry, Chair. I was just simply giving my apologies. I have to leave now.
Right, sorry. I think
the officers, I have raised one issue, which hopefully can be taken forward. I would actually quite like someone to, essentially officers to look into Councillor Walker's proposal and to give a report to the board later. But I wasn't actually planning to talk on that. Right. I just simply to leave it for board members to reflect on. But I'm afraid I must give my apologies. But can I thank officers and the past chair, yourselves, for the tremendous amount of work you have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Goodbye, Graham.
Hello. Hello. It's Rosemary Birchall. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Clive, I'd just like to thank you for all of your hard work. This has been a mammoth job, the Ashes Lawn, and I think you are, achieving a good result here. So thank you for all of your hard work over and above everything else you're doing.
Appreciate it, Councillor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any more questions for Clive?
Okay, I'll move on to point B, and this is the purchase of the new land to extend the existing Garden of Remembrance. This is of utmost importance for the crematorium and the board, because simply we're running out of land and options for new memorials. There is a constant demand for memorials, quite naturally, to commemorate a loved one, and we're running out of options. And therefore we needed to acquire new land. Unfortunately, Wandsworth Council agreed to sell us a piece of burial land which is adjacent to the crematorium, so we can move forward with that. Now again, it's been quite a lengthy legal matter which the Treasurer and myself have represented the board throughout the previous months, but we've got to a stage now where draft documentation has been prepared between the respective solicitors for the acquisition of land. And I would like board members to note that we are actually acquiring this land on a freehold basis rather than granting a lease, and the Treasurer has carried out a lot of work with this in convincing the solicitors that this is the right approach, and that therefore, in keeping with the land that the board already own, the new piece of land will be ours, will be on a freehold basis. So thank you to the Treasurer for all of his efforts with that one. Are there any questions on the acquisition of land?
I'd just like to thank the Treasurer as well, Clive. Thank you, Treasurer,
Thank
for all
you.
your work in acquiring the land. Thank you.
I move on now to the land survey, and this is very much in keeping with the new piece of land that we're soon to own. We've had initial proposals from the appointed contractor to give us ideas for new types of memorials, new schemes. We've got some really interesting ideas on the table for the new area of land. I don't know if you know, but there is a large mature chestnut tree within the grounds of the Garden of Remembrance. I've actually seen it over the years in arboricultural books. It is a tree of note. It's quite striking. I don't know if members have ever seen it, but when we actually get to a stage where you can actually visit the crematorium again for one of the board meetings, I'd like to point that one out to you because it's quite a striking tree. And with that in mind, the appointed contractor believes that this would be quite a good proposal for a new memorial scheme. People will be attracted to having their loved one perhaps with a plaque or their ashes laid to rest in and around that particular tree. We're also looking at the memorial rose beds for new ideas. I mean, these are a living tribute to a loved one, and I know Barbara's already done some extensive work on proposals to reduce the size of the bed so that the actual roses, the vigour of the roses, they survive that much better than they do at the moment. And the appointed contractor is going to give us some ideas on that. And also the area around the ornamental water fountain. This is a feature that people absolutely love. They come along to the crematorium, they'll sit around the running water, and they'll just sit there and reflect on life and obviously their memories. And we believe there's an opportunity to enhance that area with new forms of memorialisation. The traditional cloister walkway, which was actually built in the 1950s when the crematorium was first established, there's some very interesting ideas for perhaps enhancing that area as well. And the cremated remain graves areas, the rockery area and the infant garden area, all of these I'll be bringing to the board for comments and ideas for the future. And I think we've got an interesting time ahead of us. It's almost we're evolving the Garden of Remembrance for the future. So, you know, anything that we put into place is a legacy for the future, because some of these are long-term leases as well. I think we've got some interesting times coming ahead, and we're asking the contractor to give us some more detail on these initial ideas that they've put forward to us. So is there any questions on the land survey that any members have got at this point? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 4, and that's the review of the memorials. Of course, this will form part of the land survey. Item 5 is a focus group meeting. This is something that Barbara does every 2 years. I believe it's essential to continue to foster good relationships with our main stakeholders. Our main stakeholders are the funeral directors. Funeral directors could be fickle, and they can use whatever crematorium they see fit, and of course they can guide people to the crematorium of their choice. I'd like to say that the investment in the crematorium over the years through respective boards has borne fruit, because I believe our facilities are almost second to none. It's not just the staff that deliver it, it's the investment that's been made in the crematorium over the years. Sadly, I've seen examples of crematoriums around the country where they haven't invested and they look shabby, and that is certainly not the case at North East Surrey. When you visit there, I've held institute meetings there over the years, and they said to me, Clive, this is in the top 5 that we've seen in the UK. And I think, you know, that's testament to everybody involved in that. Moving on to item 6, and that's the publicising the board's facilities. Importantly, the website provided information and still remains information on that website for people regarding visiting the crematorium and its grounds during the current situation that we're in. That's important advice for people. Are there any questions on the board's facilities and its services? Thank you. And lastly, at the September meeting, it's the opportunity for me to review the action plan, which is really our Bible, or my Bible, to move forward with everything that we're doing with the crematorium. And item 7 is a new action, and that's energy efficiency. I spoke at the March meeting about a display energy certificate. That's something that if you bought a new refrigerator, for example, you've got a coloured bar chart, and it tells you how efficient that refrigerator is. For public buildings, there is a display energy certificate which does just that. It tells the public how efficient we are with the operation of our crematorium, the use of gas, the use of electricity, how well insulated the buildings are. So that comes across in this certificate. We're currently got arrangements in place with the council's energy management team, and we're soon to have a revised display energy certificate in place. Moving on to item 2 of energy efficiency, in line with all of the council's climate change policies and their move towards carbon neutral status, I'm very pleased to report to the board that the council have agreed a new 4-year contract to provide 100% green electricity. And that's sourcing electricity from wind, wave and solar power. And because we the board, are part of this agreement, the crematorium will benefit from that. And of course, that will further enhance our green credentials as a crematorium. Is there any questions on energy efficiency that you would like me to answer? It's all good news, actually.
Yeah,
that's that's a really real positive one. So,
yeah.
The question.
It's not a question, actually. It's just a thanks to Clive for that last item, because it is something over the last year we have been talking about fairly extensively, and the fact that we are, not only doing it but being seen to be doing it is very, very important indeed for this board. Thank you very much, Clive.
Thank you. Going back to page 61 of my report, I move on to repair and renewals. Now, I wasn't proposing to go through those 2 appendices, which are appendices C and D of the report. I'm happy to take any questions regarding repair and renewal or capital projects.
Is there any questions? No. Nothing in the chat box, and nobody's in Clive.
Thank you. And now I'll go on to point 3.32, the recycling of metals scheme. This has been ever so successful since we introduced it some years ago, and the board agreed previously. We have 3 nominated charities, 1 from each borough. And it's a cyclical arrangement whereby we move from one charity each year to another charity. And this year's nominated charity is Trinity Hospice in Wandsworth. And we've recently received another cheque for £10,000, which has been donated to the hospice. Now, thinking back to what was said earlier about our excess income that we've received, board members might want to be mindful that we have 3 registered charities, and they may want to think of perhaps being additional beneficiaries. I don't know, to the additional income, but that's perhaps something for a separate discussion. But it's just a thought as I saw that the scheme is generating so much money to these registered charities. It might be an opportunity to add to that contribution. I don't know.
I think it's something, Clive, that we might be able to discuss at the next meeting.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to 3.34, and that's the annual memorial service. Regrettably, because of the current situation, we've had to cancel this year's memorial service, and the public and funeral directors, and through word of mouth and also on the North East Surrey website, we've informed everybody of that not taking place. That's very important to people. I attend every year and I see the same old faces, and I also see new people that have lost people in more recent times, and it's a very, very poignant service. So it saddened me that we couldn't hold that this year. 3.36 is the management of the crematorium during COVID-19. I wasn't really going to comment on that. You can see that I've summarised everything that's currently in place, and and I'm happy to take any questions from board members on that item.
I'd just like to ask Clive about staff as well during this time and how they've been supported. Is that a question for you or a question for Barbara?
Yes, please, Barbara, would you mind commenting?
Barbara, did you not hear me?
Yes, sorry, I just had to find my microphone. Yes, I mean, obviously we've been supported by Enable higher management, checking up on us and making sure we're all okay. Regular contact with Clive, and also Councillor Draper has been emailing and checking up on us as well. We've all been, apart from one person who worked from home during the whole of the lockdown, the rest of us have all been in work every day, obviously protecting ourselves, looking after ourselves, and we've made sure that we as a team, you know, boost each other's morale and look after each other.
Right. Thank you. It's good to hear. Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you. And stay safe.
Thank you. That concludes my report for this quarter. So I'd ask the chairman to go back to page 59 and read the recommendations, please.
Thank you. Is there any more questions at all from anybody? Okay, thank you. I'll read the recommendations. To note that the report as an overview of the surveyor's findings for the management of this crematorium for the past 3 months, July to September 2020. Do we agree the recommendation?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Sharon, recommendations are agreed. Thank you. Like to move on to item 8, a report from the Treasurer presented by Mark Davies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This report, for those that are familiar with it, is the standard update that I provide at each meeting. It provides an update to the board on the performance against the management agreement annual budget that was approved in December 2019, and also provides an update to the board of the latest interim accounts, which I did touch on earlier during paper 4. So if we could draw your attention to the first appendix on here, Appendix A. You'll note that overall, after 33% of the year, so to speak, costs were running at 39% of the overall budget. So it's a slight overspend, if you want to term it that way. But generally, these additional costs are costs incurred as a result of the response to the COVID pandemic. So you'll see in the first section under cost of sales, we've got purchase of sound recordings, and this is where the board took the decision to absorb the costs of additional sound recordings, which is 79% of the budget at 33% of the year. Just moving down to the administrative costs, there are some changes to the way the board receives gas and electricity through Enable, and in future it's going to be done directly via Wandsworth Council. So that will need to be reflected when I reset the budget come December. Essentially the costs that are showing within there for this year to date are final accounts where previous bills were paid on estimates, or where we've set up accruals within the accounts at the end of the financial year. For moving down to water charges, you'll see there's a significant overspend on that. I mean, that's still being investigated. We got a very large backdated bill, which I understand it was a result of the previous year's bills being based on estimates. We're still looking into that, and we've got to have discussions with Wandsworth about a cost sharing arrangement, whereby the water charges that are incurred are split fairly between the cemetery and the crematorium. So that's something that's on the agenda to look at probably before December. And then, yes, so overall, you can see that against the original budget, which was 476,000 for the management agreement, the costs incurred to date are 187,000. So a little bit over where we would expect to be on a straightforward pro rata, a straight line basis. But I think it does continue to show good cost control and the fact that it's managed very efficiently by the Enable contractors. Moving on to the second part of my report, which is the interim accounts for the period 1st of April to the 31st of March. This is in Appendix B. What you'll see, so basically I show the original budget compared to last year, show the actuals incurred year to date, and then sort of forecast the overall position. So that would be the final column on there. You can see that I'm forecasting costs in line with the management agreement as just discussed above, and then the additional income. So line 18 on Appendix B shows the additional income that we're expected to generate as a result of the additional cremations that have happened throughout the first 4 months of the year. Overall, I'm predicting a year-end balance of 710,000 compared to an original estimate of sort of 715. But there's a little bit of it masks the fact that some of the capital schemes have slipped from one year to the other. So I think we're probably, as I said earlier, probably about 150 to 200,000 higher estimated end balance than would have otherwise been the case at this stage. Happy to take any questions.
There's no questions, Mark. There's nothing in the chat box.
Okay. If you could go through the recommendations then, please.
Sorry. The recommendations are to note the management agreement performance for the period the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021, and to note the interim accounts for the period the 1st of April 2020 to 31st of March 2021, attached at Appendix B for information. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Sharon, that's agreed. And I think it's you again, Mark.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be taking the stage for the rest
Risk
of it.
management review. Thank you.
I mean, this is actually a joint report, so it's the report of the 3 chief officers, and it's an annual review of all the risks that we feel are present in the operating environment, and what it sets out is the risks that have been identified and how we propose to manage and mitigate against those risks. Now, those that were on the board a year ago will recall that it was recommended that we try and quantify the risk in terms of the likelihood of the risk occurring and also the severity that the risk might actually have should it occur. So myself, Clive and Sharon, so the 3 of us have worked through producing a coloured coded scoring chart. So if you refer to 3.8 within the report, you can see how we scored the likelihood and the impact, with a low risk being a score of 1 or green, medium, amber or yellow, and a high risk being red or 3. And then what we've then done is sort to quantify it, so almost rank those risks by multiplying the respective scores together. So obviously if something was high risk and high impact, it would score a 9 and be showing as a very high risk high risk on the register. So I wasn't proposing to run through all the risks, because actually the risks that are on the register are the same that were there last year, obviously updated as and where required. But we have done some extensive sort of assessment of the risks and colour coordinated them. So I mean, I could take questions category by category, or I could look to take any questions on the entire document.
Is there any questions from councillors? Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go straight to number 25 on the risks. You know that one, Mark, don't you?
I'm guessing it's going to be a bright red one.
Well, well, it's about as red. Well, I haven't got the colours here, but it's about as red as it gets.
Yes.
It's the pandemic plan.
Sure. Yes.
I just thought, here you've actually got a risk. So often these risks come to nothing. They're just there in the background. Here is something which we actually had to deal with, and how well do you reckon, leaving aside what you actually did, from day to day, how well did the preparations work against the plan?
I mean, I'll probably leave it to Clive to answer this, but I mean, generally, when we're looking at these sort of documents, you look at risks that are classified like that, and you think to yourself, oh, what's the likelihood of that actually happening? Why is it there? I suppose it's necessary to be there as a just in case. You never expect it to be needed. But I think the plans that have been in place, it's testament to everybody that we have continued to operate. We've continued to operate efficiently. We haven't had to shut. We haven't diminished service at all. And I think that shows actually that the plans in place are robust. And by following governance process like this, we have that forethought and that forward look at what might actually happen, and try and have something in place to mitigate it should it happen. We've scored it quite high this year. Obviously, we know the impact of a second wave could be high, and equally, we're only taking sort of news coverage about the likelihood of a second wave as well. So it is probably the highest scoring risk on the register this year, and hopefully in a year's time we'll be able to downgrade that, but as it is, it's a snapshot at a point in time, and we can only sort of comment on the findings that we have. So did you want to add anything to that, Clive?
Yeah, I'd say that the whole process wasn't easy, particularly for Barbara and her staff, and trying to acquire suitable staff to help with the experienced people was also very difficult, because not only moving somebody from, say, a library or sports services into a bereavement environment, I think you've got to have certain qualities in order to be able to work in that environment. It isn't everyone's cup of tea, I've got to say. And although we've demonstrated our risk management, and we've got proof that it works, I think Barbara would agree with me. It was quite a task to support a 2-shift system from early in the morning until late at night. But that said, we did it, and I'm fairly confident with how we've assessed the risk and how we've responded to that.
Thank you, Clive. Nigel, did you have a question? No. Okay. Is there any more questions? Mark, have you finished?
Yes, sorry. If you could deal with the recommendations, please.
The recommendations are to note the annual review of risk and risk register as set out in the appendix to this report. Is that all agreed? That's agreed, Sharon. That's agreed. Item 9. Am I on item 10? Sorry. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
Item 10. So thank you. Is this you again, Mark?
Yeah, I'll take the lead on this one again. It's a joint report from the 3 chief officers. So this report is to provide an update to the board following the annual review of the board's standing orders, the scheme of delegation and the financial regulations, and confirms that the relevant governance documents have been reviewed and that only minimal changes are deemed necessary at this time. So members may recall, as part of the 2017 and 18 internal audit review, there was an action for officers of the board to review the standing orders, scheme of delegations and financial regulations to ensure that they are up to date, accurate, appropriate and generally fit for purpose. I mean, I think you'll all be familiar with these documents in your respective councils, and obviously the North East Surrey Crematorium Board is governed by the same sort of processes, so is required to have these documents in place. So basically, we've gone through each of the key documents there, and I'll deal with each one in turn. So with regards to the standing orders, the only minor amendments that have been suggested were in relation to the flexibility with regards to sealing and signing of documents, and it's for the reasons the previous name-specific officer was unavailable to sign the documents. The need for this has become evident during the COVID-19 lockdown period, where officers under different circumstances may have not been available due to restrictions on movements and shielding requirements. So basically, within the standing orders before, it would specifically name an officer as saying they had the responsibility for signing a certain document. We're just trying to allow the flexibility that, if this situation arises again, and we're required to social distance or various members of staff are shielding and lockdown, we still have the resilience to enable someone else to essentially sign it on our behalf and still be in compliance with our own standing orders. I'll happily take any other questions on the standing orders before I move on to the scheme of delegations.
I can't see anything in the chat box, Mark, so there's no...
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So the scheme of delegations, which is also attached, again, only minor amendments have been suggested following the review of the scheme of delegations. Essentially, where we have we've changed item 3. So item 3 is chief officers may delegate authorities to appropriate officers subject to the board's approval, provided delegated limits do not exceed the delegated limits applying to the chief officer. Now that might sound a little bit confusing, but essentially, as chief officers, we are entitled to delegate responsibility to other members of our staff, subject to these limits being in place. Now, what's become apparent is as part of the review of governance documents and arrangements, it has come to the attention of the chief officers that whilst provision has explicit reference to delegated limits applying to chief officers, it is actually unclear to what the financial limit is. I've never seen it actually set out. So whilst this has always been taken to allow any level of expenditure so long as it is within the approved estimates, which the board approve each December, it is now considered necessary to define the level in addition to the approved estimates that chief officers are authorised to approve expenditure up to. It's considered that a limit of £5,000 for each individual approval is considered reasonable. So where the proposal is that where the expenditure that is being authorised is in excess of the approved estimates, the treasurer and myself will always be consulted to confirm the proposed expenditure will not have a material impact on the board's overall financial position. And then any decisions taken and any expenditure approved in excess of the specified approved estimates will be reported to the board at the next opportunity. The only other addition is members might recall back in March we dealt with a review of the rent payments for the lodge building at the entrance to the crematorium grounds, and it was delegated to the treasurer to be able to sign the memorandum, which basically agrees the revised rent. So this is a rent review mechanism that every 5th year the rent is increased in line with inflation, but you have to formally acknowledge acceptance of the higher rent. So we've formally added that into the delegation document. So that covers the changes to the scheme of delegations. And again, if anyone has any questions on these changes or the document generally, happy to take questions.
There's nothing in the chat box, Mark. Any questions?
Fantastic.
No, there's no questions, Mark.
Okay, so just moving on to the final part of this then is amendments to the financial regulations. Again, only a minor amendment has been suggested following the review of the financial regulations. We've shown the change in bold in 4.8. So essentially, its payments are only made without explicit board authorisation if they are consistent with the estimates previously approved by the board And we've added, and this it aligns with the previous change to the standing orders, or where in consultation with the Treasurer it's considered that the payments will not have a material financial impact, on the overall financial position. So that then makes sure the financial regulations aligns with the changes to the scheme of delegation that we just discussed there. So that's the proposed changes. They're all set out in Appendix C. Happy to take any final questions if anyone has any.
Is there anything? No, there's no questions, Mark.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Shall we go to the recommendations?
Yes, please.
Item 2.1, note that the review of the board standing orders, the scheme of delegations and the financial regulations has taken place. 2.2, approve the standing orders as attached at Appendix A. 2.3, approve the scheme of delegations as attached at Appendix B. And 2.4, approve the financial regulations as attached to Appendix C. Is that agreed? It's all agreed.
Thank you.
Is this, Sharon, where the exempt part? Are we taking any urgent business?
Yes, please. If you could do any urgent business next, and then if before we move into the exempt session, we would just need to have the motion for exclusion of the press and publish moved.
Right. So is there any urgent business? No, there's no urgent business. The next discussion may involve sensitive subject matter, so I would like to move a motion to exclude the public and press at this stage. I move that the public and press be excluded from the remainder of this meeting on the grounds that the remaining item on the agenda involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Do I have a seconder?